Her daughter called that morning with a strange feeling she couldn't explain. Carmen told her everything was fine. She was wrong. Before she left for the bus station, Amanda, her daughter, her best friend, the only person who had ever truly seen her, paused on the phone and said, "Mom, are you really okay?" And Carmen, in a rush, distracted, said yes. Because everything seemed fine. Because Richard was carrying her suitcase. Because he had bought her coffee. Because after 33 years, you stopped seeing the signs. But Amanda had seen them. She'd seen them when she was 16 years old, at a mall, watching her father hold another woman's hand. She cried when she told her mother. Carmen didn't believe her. She fought with her daughter and chose her husband instead. Now, on a bus pulling out of a terminal in New York City, with the world spinning around her and her body no longer obeying her commands, Carmen heard the words she would never forget, whispered by the man she had defended for decades, the man who had just poisoned her, the man who was already walking away without a single glance back. She had one thought before the darkness closed in. Just one. Amanda was right. She was always right. Never silence the people who love you enough to tell you the truth, even when it hurts. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're from. I want to see how far this story reaches, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. This content was manually researched, built, and edited by our team to bring you meaning and real lessons from real human stories.
The first thing to know is that it started in a place built for endings and beginnings, New York's Port Authority, a roaring cavern of diesel fumes and desperate goodbyes. Her husband, Nathan, the man whose face she'd memorized over 33 years of marriage, pressed a warm paper cup into her hands. He leaned close, his voice a perfect imitation of love itself, as he murmured, "Drink this, Ash. It's a long trip." Of course she trusted him. So she drank. And as the concrete floor began to soften and the harsh fluorescent lights bled into streaks, he steered her toward the boarding platform, his lips brushing her ear with the words that were meant to be her epitaph. "An hour from now, you won't even know your own name." In that one sickening lurch of understanding, she realized this wasn't a trip. It was an execution. But even the most meticulously crafted plans have a fatal flaw. And Nathan's was this. He never accounted for a miracle. He couldn't have predicted that a ghost from a life lived 4 decades earlier would be standing at a grimy rest stop in the middle of nowhere. A man named Spencer, who would look straight through her chemically blank stare and recognize the terror beneath. He'd later tell police, his voice trembling with disbelief, "I just knew. My God, she was shaking. I asked her, 'What did he do to you?'" That whole waking nightmare, a chain reaction of betrayals leading to that one impossible rescue, had begun just hours before, on a Saturday morning that felt so profoundly, deceptively ordinary. It began the moment Ashley woke up and saw Nathan already dressed, waiting by the door. And for them, that was the first sign the world was off its axis. You have to understand, this was a marriage 33 years in the making. Imagine that. 3 decades of shared mornings, a life constructed piece by piece from a million quiet routines. For Nathan to be up, dressed, and buzzing with energy before her was more than unusual. It was the first tremor of an earthquake she didn't feel coming. "Morning, sunshine," he'd chirped, a note of forced cheer in his voice. "All set for your big trip?" The story they'd told the world was simple. Ashley was heading to Montauk for a few days to care for her mother, recently discharged from the hospital after a brutal fight with pneumonia. And this trip, according to those closest to the couple, was entirely Nathan's idea. For weeks, he'd been relentless. "You need a break, Ash. You've earned it." And he wasn't wrong. She was the engine of their life. Ashley owned and operated 3 wildly successful fashion boutiques, a small empire she'd built from a single stall at a dusty Queens flea market. She managed a staff of over 20, juggled international suppliers, and was the creative force behind a brand that carried her name, quite literally. Because everything, from the business to their sprawling Upper West Side apartment, was in her name. The boutiques, the deed to their home, even the car she drove. It was all a testament to her vision and her relentless hard work. Nathan, by contrast, ran a boutique wine import business. It was his passion project, a venture that, according to a review of their finances, had in 33 years performed the astonishing feat of never turning a single dollar of profit. But that's what a marriage is, isn't it? A partnership. You lift the person you love. That's the story Ashley had always told herself, at least. "You're sure you don't want to just fly?" he'd asked while she was packing, already knowing the answer, already knowing her crippling fear of flying was a key part of his plan. "Nathan, you know I hate those things. They terrify me," she'd replied. The same answer she'd given for decades. "The bus is perfectly fine." He didn't press the issue. He rarely did. While Ashley folded a few comfortable sweaters into her overnight bag, Nathan prowled the apartment, a current of agitated energy crackling around him. He checked his watch every 5 minutes, his movements sharp and anxious. "Bus leaves at 10, Ash. We really ought to head out." "Relax, will you?" she said, attempting to soothe his frantic mood. "I've got more than enough time." He mumbled a weak excuse about weekend traffic, but the excuse felt thin, transparent. He just seemed wound impossibly tight, a detail she tragically misinterpreted as concern for her ailing mother. As she applied a final touch of lipstick, her phone buzzed on the vanity. It was their daughter, Chloe. And if there was one undeniable success in Ashley's life, it was her daughter. At 30 years old, Chloe was a brilliant, sharp-witted family law attorney. But more than that, she was Ashley's closest confidant. They were a team, the kind of mother and daughter who spoke every single day, a ritual that anchored them both. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" Chloe's voice was an instant comfort. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just packing my last few things for the trip out to see Grandma." A beat of silence followed, a small pocket of dead air that Ashley had learned to recognize as a prelude to an uncomfortable truth. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" Chloe pressed. "I've got a really bad feeling." Chloe had always possessed a kind of unnerving intuition, a sixth sense for when things were wrong. A huge part of that intuition was aimed squarely at her father. She'd never trusted him, not since she was 16 and came home from the mall shattered, swearing she'd seen Nathan holding hands with another woman. Ashley, desperate to protect the fragile architecture of her marriage, had shut her daughter down completely. She'd even accused Chloe of being dramatic, of trying to cause trouble. Chloe never mentioned it again. But from that day forward, a wall of Arctic ice rose between her and her father. The temperature in a room would drop 10 degrees the moment he entered. It was a silent, simmering cold war. A deep and abiding suspicion that Ashley had to have seen, but made a conscious choice every single day to ignore. Because to acknowledge it would have meant demolishing her entire world. "I'm fine, sweetie. Don't worry about me," she lied. "Okay, Mom." Just promise you'll call me the minute you get there, Chloe insisted. I love you. As Ashley ended the call, a profound, unexplainable sadness settled in her chest. She walked into the living room to find Nathan standing by the door, her suitcase already in his hand. He was smiling at her, but it was not his smile. It was a cold, triumphant smirk she had never seen before. The look of a predator that knows the hunt is over. If she'd had any inkling of what was truly waiting for her, she would have run to that phone, called her daughter back, and screamed that she had been right all along. But she didn't know. So she followed him out the door. Down in the terminal's chaos, she pointed out that her usual bus to Montauk always left from the lower level. They switched providers, honey, Nathan said, his voice unnaturally smooth. This company uses newer buses. It's an upgrade. She simply nodded, too distracted to question it. Lost in the symphony of roaring engines and frantic announcements, she let him lead, trusting him to navigate the chaos, just as she always had. The one detail that snagged, a tiny glitch in the matrix of their 33-year routine, was that Nathan was carrying her bag. It sounds insignificant, but in their entire marriage, he had never once carried a bag for her. It was a small courtesy he had simply never offered. But Ashley was so tired. Drained from work, drained from his strange, manic energy, she was just too profoundly weary to register the blaring siren that small act should have triggered in her mind. She did, however, notice the beads of sweat on his forehead, the way his eyes darted around the crowded terminal as if he were casing the exits or expecting a tap on the shoulder. Are you all right, Nathan? She asked. Fine, honey. It's just really warm in here. It wasn't warm. The terminal was pumping out Arctic waves of air conditioning. But, once again, she let the lie slide past, unchallenged. I'm going to get you a coffee, he announced, already moving away. Don't move. He was back in under 2 minutes, impossibly fast for a Port Authority coffee line. He held a single steaming cup. Here, he said, pressing it into her hand. This will keep you awake on the ride. She took a tentative sip. It tasted wrong, acrid and bitter with a chemical aftertaste. But she dismissed it instantly. Bus station coffee, she thought. It's always disgusting. It was a simple, logical explanation for a terrifying truth, and it would prove to be an almost fatal mistake. She forced herself to take a second sip, and then a third, all while Nathan watched her, his gaze fixed on her with a predatory, unblinking focus. He was waiting for something. You could feel the anticipation radiating off him. Come on, Ash. Your bus is boarding. He took her arm to guide her toward the gate, and that's when her head began to feel disconnected, as if it were a balloon floating away from her body. Nathan, I feel really weird, she slurred. It's the heat, honey, he replied, his voice a mask of calm. Then her legs dissolved beneath her. They simply ceased to function. She collapsed against him, and his arms snaked around her waist, his grip not supportive but controlling, painfully tight. Easy there, Ash. I've got you. He was practically carrying her now, dragging her up the steep steps of the bus. Her vision had smeared into an incomprehensible blur. She couldn't have read the destination sign if her life depended on it. The bus driver gave them a sideways glance but said nothing. Nathan flashed a ticket at the driver, a ticket she had no memory of him purchasing. He propelled her down the narrow aisle to a seat in the very back, as her consciousness spiraled into a vortex of nausea and confusion. The sharp, distinct sounds of the terminal began to warp and fade, as if she were sinking slowly to the bottom of a deep pool. He leaned over her, his face so close she could feel the heat of his breath as he whispered into her ear. It was the whisper that shattered her world, a venomous secret delivered in a breath against her ear that instantly turned her blood to ice. In an hour, you won't even remember your own name. A silent scream was tearing at the base of her throat, a desperate, primal sound with nowhere to go. Her own body had become a prison, her limbs unresponsive, and all she could do was watch, a spectator to her own destruction, as the man she'd built a life with systematically dismantled it. Ryan pulled away, his face twisting into one last smile, an expression of such pure, bottomless cruelty, it would be seared into her mind for whatever time she had left. Goodbye, Jessica. With that final, hollow word, he simply stood up and walked down the aisle of the bus. He never glanced back. Through the grime-streaked window, she watched his silhouette stride away with an unnerving calmness. A man who had just sentenced his wife of 33 years to a living nightmare and was now melting back into the anonymous city streets as if he'd just stepped off his daily commute. The heavy vehicle groaned, its air brakes hissing as it lurched back into traffic. Her mind was fraying at the edges, the tapestry of her consciousness unraveling stitch by painful stitch. The final, lucid thought that managed to slice through the thick, creeping chemical fog was a vision of Madison. Her daughter had known. All those years, all those subtle warnings Jessica had brushed aside. Madison had seen the monster all along. The bus shuddered to a halt somewhere down the highway, but to Jessica it could have been 5 minutes or 5 hours later. The concept of time had dissolved into nothing. She was simply adrift in a terrifying gray void between awareness and oblivion when the driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a mandatory rest stop. She could hear the rustle of clothes and the shuffle of feet as other passengers began to stir and make their way out. She willed her own body to move, but her limbs felt as if they were cast in concrete. Her legs began to shake violently, a tremor she had no power to stop. A cold sweat slicked her skin, plastering her hair to her forehead. A woman from the seat ahead turned, her expression of mild curiosity instantly curdling into a mask of sheer terror. "My God, this woman is sick!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the bus's quiet hum. "Somebody get help!" The world dissolved into a smear of motion and a symphony of panicked voices. Someone was trying to pull her to her feet, but the connection between her brain and her mouth was severed. She couldn't explain, couldn't tell them what was happening. They had to half drag, half carry her down the steps. The shock of cool night air on her clammy skin was like a physical blow. They eased her onto a cold concrete bench as a small crowd began to gather, their faces a gallery of pity and morbid fascination. The bus driver was shouting at someone to call 911. This is how it ends, she thought, a strange calm settling over the panic. On a dirty bench at some forgotten rest stop off I-95, a complete mystery to everyone who watches me die. And then, a clear, authoritative voice sliced through the noise. "I'm a doctor. Let me through. What happened here?" The voice belonged to a man, its tone firm and reassuring. He knelt before her, his touch practiced and impersonal as he took her wrist to check her pulse, then gently lifted her eyelid. She could feel him rummaging through her purse, searching for a wallet, for any clue to her identity. Then his entire demeanor shifted. The professional calm evaporated, replaced by a note of stunned, breathless disbelief. Jessica, is that you? Jessica Moreau? She forced her sluggish eyes to focus, to fight their way through the deepening haze toward the face just inches from her own. He had salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes that felt achingly, profoundly familiar. Tyler, she managed to breathe, the name a faint puff of air. But he heard it. Oh my God, he whispered, staring at her as if he'd just seen a ghost walk out of the past. After all this time, what in God's name did he do to you? It was Tyler Roberts, the quiet, brilliant boy she'd known in high school 4 decades ago. To understand the man kneeling in front of her, you have to rewind 40 years. Picture Tyler, a gangly, soft-spoken kid hidden behind thick glasses. The kind of boy who was practically a magnet for every swaggering jock on campus. Jessica still had a crystal clear memory of one brutal afternoon, seeing 3 of them shove him hard against a row of faded blue lockers. And Jessica, even as a teenager, had a spine of steel. She marched right over, her voice a whip crack of indignation, and verbally sliced them down until they backed away, mumbling and defeated. In that moment, an alliance was forged. He tutored her through trigonometry. She became his unofficial bodyguard. It was a friendship born in the crucible of high school hallways, pure and simple. But for Tyler, it was always more. He was hopelessly in love with her, a fact so obvious it was a running joke among their friends. Everyone saw it. Everyone, it seemed, except Jessica, who remained blissfully, or perhaps willfully, unaware of the depth of his feelings until the night of their senior prom. The story of how their lives diverged begins, as so many do, with a single moment of chance in a sun-drenched high school garden. 40 years before he would find her dying at a rest stop, Tyler was a bundle of raw nerves, his hands trembling as he tried to find the words to ask Jessica to be his date. But just as he opened his mouth, the brash sound of a car horn ripped through the afternoon. It was Ryan, the school's charismatic golden boy, leaning out of a polished red convertible with an easy grin. "Jessica, come on," he called out. "I'll give you a lift." She flashed Tyler a quick, apologetic smile. "Sorry, Ty. We'll talk later." But as the pieces of this tragedy fall into place, it becomes devastatingly clear. There was no later. That one interruption, that single careless choice, sent their lives hurtling down 2 vastly different paths. Jessica, of course, began dating Ryan. And Tyler? He poured himself into his studies, left their small town behind, and enrolled in a medical program on the other side of the country. For 4 decades, their lives moved on parallel tracks that never intersected. 40 years. A whole lifetime lived without a single word exchanged between them. And then, on the cracked pavement of a desolate interstate rest stop, those 2 tracks collided with violent force. He found her there, disoriented and radiating a silent, primal terror. He could see it in her wide, unfocused eyes, a storm of confusion and a desperate plea for help. "Jessica, what's going on?" Tyler urged, decades of emergency room training overriding the ghost of a high school crush. "Did you take something?" She tried to answer, but her words were a tangled, terrifying slurry. "His coffee?" she finally forced out, the words broken and raw. "Ryan, the coffee." To anyone else, it would have been meaningless babble. But for Tyler, a physician, it was a diagnostic thunderclap. Every disjointed piece of the scene slammed into place with horrifying clarity. A witness might have heard the ice in his voice as he muttered, "That son of a bitch!" Then his voice boomed with the unmistakable command of a trauma surgeon, silencing the nervous chatter around them. Somebody call 911 now. Report a suspected acute poisoning. He carefully lowered her onto the grimy concrete, rolling her into the recovery position, his fingers checking her airway as his voice became a calm, steady anchor in the toxic storm pulling her under. Jessica, I need you to stay with me. Look at me, he pleaded, his face close to hers. She tried, fighting with every last shred of her will, but the world was shrinking to a pinhole of black. A cold, immobilizing terror seized her as the full weight of her husband's betrayal crashed down. He tried to kill me, was the thought that pierced the fog. It was as if Tyler heard her. I know, Jessica, I know. But you are not going to die, not while I'm here. And then, cutting through the darkness, came the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant, rising wail of sirens growing steadily closer. The clipped, professional voices of the paramedics soon joined the fray, and through it all, there was Tyler, calm and in command, giving them a rapid, precise assessment. I suspect poisoning with an amnesic sedative, he explained, his diagnosis swift and chillingly certain. Likely a benzodiazepine derivative or scopolamine. She'll need an immediate gastric lavage, activated charcoal, and a full toxicology workup. A paramedic, clipboard in hand, asked the obligatory question. Are you family, sir? My source says. Tyler paused for just a second, his gaze fixed on the ashen face of the woman he almost asked to prom 40 years ago, the woman he'd never quite forgotten. I'm a friend, he said, the weight of 4 decades hanging on those 3 words. I've been her friend for 40 years. And as they carefully lifted her onto the gurney, he reached for her hand. He refused to let go. I'm told the last thing Jessica saw before the darkness consumed her completely was his face. The same shy, kind-eyed boy from the school garden. Now, the man who was saving her life. In a way, Tyler saved her twice that night. Once as a doctor, and once as the friend she had unknowingly left behind so long ago. When she finally managed to force her eyelids open, the first thing she registered was a sterile, white ceiling, the biting scent of antiseptic, the rhythmic beep of a monitor, the unrelenting glare of fluorescent lights. She was in a hospital, and against every possible odd, she was alive. For one fleeting, beautiful moment, her mind was a perfect blank, an empty canvas. There was no memory of the doctored coffee, the nightmarish bus ride, or Ryan's poisoned farewell. She was just a body in a bed, weightless, untethered from the horror of her immediate past. And then the dam broke. The memories returned in a sickening, violent rush. The acrid chemical taste of the coffee, the terrifying rubbery weakness in her legs as she stumbled through the bus terminal, the cold smile on her husband's face. In an hour, you won't even remember your own name. Ryan's parting shot echoed in the sterile silence of the room, a promise he had failed to keep. Because she did remember. She remembered it all. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. Tyler was slumped in a visitor's chair beside her bed, the dark circles under his eyes and the shadow of a beard testifying to a long, sleepless vigil. Jessica, he breathed, his voice raw with emotion as he surged forward, a wave of profound relief washing over his tired features. You're awake. Oh, thank God you're awake. A sound tried to form in her throat, but it came out as a dry rasp, like stones scraping together. Before the panic could set in, Jake was there, a steady hand guiding a cup of water to her lips. The simple coolness of it was a revelation. What time is it? She breathed, the words thin and brittle. 9 in the morning, he said, his voice a low comfort in the sterile room. Sunday, you were out for nearly 20 hours. 20 hours! A whole rotation of the earth had happened without her, a day carved out of her life by the one man who had promised to be its guardian. Jake, she asked, the words catching, what did he do? He inhaled slowly, his calm a fragile shield, and his hands enveloped hers. Chloe, listen to me. There is no gentle way to tell you this. She held up a hand, cutting him off as a cold, terrifying clarity washed over her. I know. Connor. He tried to kill me. Jake's head moved in a slow, solemn arc. His eyes were dark with something heavier than sorrow. No, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Not kill you. He was trying to do something far worse. Worse? What abyss lay beyond murder? He then began to explain the science of the drug Connor had used, a compound engineered not for cardiac arrest, but for the systematic and total demolition of the mind. It was a poison for the soul, a chemical that left the body functioning but scrubbed the person clean from the inside out. He explained that if he hadn't found her, if even a few more hours had passed, she would have woken up a ghost in her own skin. She wouldn't have known her name, her history, or the face of her own daughter, a breathing, empty vessel. He wanted to delete you, Chloe, Jake said, his voice vibrating with a contained, furious energy. Not end you, erase you. A violent wave of sickness, more potent than any poison, surged from the pit of her stomach, the physical rejection that comes only from absolute betrayal. Why? The word was a puff of air, lost in the quiet hum of the hospital room. I don't understand. Jake shook his head again, a gesture of grim confusion. I don't have that answer yet, but I swear to you, we're gonna get it. He then produced a bus ticket, retrieved from the bottom of her purse. The destination, printed in stark black letters, wasn't the breezy seaside town of Montauk, the location of the relaxing getaway Connor had planned. It was a one-way fare to Omaha, Nebraska, a grueling, nearly 2-day journey. And the name on the ticket wasn't hers. It was Maria Sanchez. The architecture of the plan was as elegant as it was monstrous. He was going to lose you in the heartland, Jake laid out, his voice tight with disbelief. You'd be an anonymous woman, a blank slate with no past. She would have become another tragic Jane Doe, a ghost haunting a filing cabinet, while he performed the role of the devastated husband and inherited the empire she had built. Every last bit of it. The chic boutiques she'd willed into existence, the sleek city apartment, her car, a lifetime of work, vaporized. 33 years, she whispered, the number feeling foreign and absurd on her tongue, the final act of a 3-decade marriage. The dam of her composure finally broke. She couldn't contain it. A raw, elemental grief erupted from her. A sound she hadn't made since she was a little girl, and the world still had the capacity to truly break her heart. Her body was seized by sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Through it all, Jake just sat there. He held her hand, a silent, unwavering anchor in the hurricane. When the storm finally passed, leaving her hollowed out and weak, she looked at him through swollen eyes. What am I supposed to do now, Jake? His face hardened, the kindness in his eyes solidifying into steel. First, we bring in the law. You have that detective friend. You mentioned her once. Sarah. Detective Sarah Miller. They were dorm mates in college, and though Chloe had chased fabrics and fashion while Sarah pursued justice and a badge, the core of their friendship remained unbreakable. Call her, Jake urged, a grim smile forming. Tell her every last detail. And then we figure out our next move. Chloe stared at him, adrift in a sea of wreckage. A move for what? Jake's smile sharpened. For your comeback. And right then, propped up in a hospital bed with Jake's hand grounding her, she made the call. They had always been each other's emergency contact, the one person they could count on no matter the distance or the years. Chloe knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she could trust Sarah with her life and with the terrifying task of taking her husband down. Chloe, oh my God, what's happened? Sarah's voice crackled over the line, a chaotic blend of fear and bewilderment. You vanished for a day and now you're in a hospital. So Chloe told her. She unspooled the whole nightmare, one horrifying thread at a time. She spoke of the bitter tang in her morning coffee, the creeping confusion that had descended at the bus terminal, and the final, chilling words Connor had whispered in her ear. She told her about Jake, the friend who had reappeared from her past like an answered prayer and pulled her back from the edge. Sarah was silent on the other end, but it was a working silence, the sound of a professional mind piecing together the jagged shards of a crime. Chloe, she said finally, her tone stripped of all warmth, replaced by a cold, lethal fury. I've met my share of spineless men, but your husband, he's in a class all his own. Sarah, I need you, Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling. You've got me, Sarah replied instantly, without a fraction of a second's hesitation. I'm handling this personally. Your job is to stay put and stay quiet. No one finds out you're there, and this is critical. No one finds out your memory is intact. I'm looping in Ashley on the legal end. She's the only other soul I'd trust with this. I understand, Chloe confirmed, a new strength beginning to solidify around her fear. And Chloe? A new voice, Ashley's, cut in, sharp but warm. Yeah, Chloe answered. Look, Ashley said, her voice a mix of fierce loyalty and affection. It's been 30 years of us against the world. Did you really think we'd let you go through this alone? When the call ended, Chloe felt it. A single defiant spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. And there was Jake. He hadn't moved from the stiff visitor's chair, having already canceled his keynote speech at a major neurology conference. Jake, you don't have to stay, she said, her voice still thin. I'll be okay. I know I don't have to, he replied, his eyes on the gray cityscape beyond the window. I want to. He turned to look at her fully. You saved me once, back in high school. A couple of bullies had me backed up behind the bleachers and you just showed up out of nowhere. You got right in their faces and told them to back off. Suddenly, the memory surfaced through the fog, a vivid snapshot from another life. She had never forgotten that day. I'm not walking away from you now, Chloe, he said, his voice an anchor. Not after this. She reached for his hand, giving it a squeeze, and in the quiet of that sterile room, a universe of gratitude passed between them. That night, lying awake and staring at the acoustic tiled ceiling, Chloe made a vow. When this was over, she would find her daughter, Brittany. She would tell her she was right all along about Connor, and she would finally be the mother her daughter deserved. She just had to survive this. Ashley, meanwhile, worked with the ferocity of a storm. In just 48 hours, she had torn through Connor's meticulously crafted life, and the reality she uncovered was more depraved than Chloe could have imagined. His distinguished wine import business wasn't in a slump. It had been utterly bankrupt for 2 solid years. He'd kept up the charade, kissing her goodbye each morning to head to a job that didn't exist while his world was secretly burning to the ground. But that was only the appetizer. Connor wasn't just broke, he was submerged. He owed more than $1 million to a loan shark with clear mob connections, the fallout from a smuggling deal gone bad. His life wasn't just falling apart, it was under direct threat. And, of course, there was another woman. Her name was Jessica, a 32-year-old personal trainer with bleached blonde hair, impossibly long nails that clicked on every surface, and a closet that seemed to contain nothing but second skin athletic wear. Ashley laid the surveillance photos out on the thin hospital blanket, a gallery of his betrayal. Connor and Jessica emerging from a seedy motel, holding hands in a shopping mall, dining at restaurants that Chloe's money had paid for. It was a 2-year performance built on a foundation of her trust and his deceit. The text messages paint the full picture, Ashley said, her voice dripping with contempt as she started to read them. There was Jessica, asking when Connor was finally going to ditch the old hag. Then there was Connor, a ghost in her phone, texting promises that everything would be sorted out soon. It was all for Jessica, the other woman whose endless demands for designer bags and tropical vacations were being funded by the very company Sarah thought she was saving. The business she poured her own money into, trying to keep it afloat, was just his private slush fund. Did she know? Sarah's voice was a raw whisper. Did she know about the debt? Ashley confirmed it all. Jessica knew, and she was waiting, convinced that the moment Sarah was erased, the money, the assets, the entire life Sarah had built would fall right into her lap. Disappeared. Such a sterile, bloodless word for the abyss he had designed for her. Ashley's digging had unearthed the pharmacist, a man who crumbled the instant he saw a still from his own security camera. $15,000 was the going rate to turn a woman into a phantom, to chemically scrub her mind clean. We have the bus station footage, too, Ashley said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling frequency. It's all there, Sarah. We see Connor. We see him slide the powder into your coffee, carry your dead weight onto that bus, and then just walk away. He doesn't even look back. Every second of it, captured forever. On some clinical level, Sarah knew she should be a wreck, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But after the initial flood of tears in the hospital, the well had run dry. What was left was a cold, quiet fury hardening in her core. So what happens now? She asked, the words steely. A slow, almost predatory smile stretched across Ashley's face. Now? We let him walk right into the trap. Connor's already filed a petition for emergency access to your accounts. He's telling the court you vanished, Ashley continued, a glint in her eye. And he needs your money to fund a search party. The audacity was breathtaking, a dark, twisted piece of theater. The hearing is in 5 days, and you, my friend, are going to make an entrance. You're going to walk into that courtroom alive and well, with every memory intact and this mountain of evidence to back you up. I'm telling you, the look on his face will be one for the history books. He planned the perfect crime, Sarah murmured, her voice a low hum of disbelief and resolve. He just didn't plan on your best friend being a detective, Ashley finished, a smirk playing on her lips. They shared a laugh, a sound stripped of all joy, yet ringing with a shared, unbreakable determination. Just knowing she wasn't facing this alone was an anchor in the storm. Ashley left that night with a promise to return in a couple of days. But Jake, the man who had been there from the start, remained. You need to rest, Sarah told him, her gaze tracing the exhaustion etched beneath his eyes. You haven't really slept in 3 days. Jake, the stranger who found her wandering that empty road, simply looked at her, his expression unwavering. "I'll sleep when you're safe," he said. In the antiseptic quiet of that room, he was the living embodiment of everything Connor pretended to be but never was. Gentle, constant, and fiercely protective. A heavy silence settled between them, not of awkwardness, but of a profound, unspoken understanding. That fragile peace was obliterated the next morning by a call from Detective Miller. "Sarah," she began, her voice strained, "your husband just called this hospital." An arctic chill bled into Sarah's veins. "Does he know?" Sarah whispered, her throat tightening around the words. "No," Miller said, "but it was damn close. He's systematically calling every hospital on that bus route, asking about a woman in her 50s, no ID. The receptionist was about to confirm you were here. I caught her just in time. You're under full police protection now. No one gets in or out with information about you. Period." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the relief was paper thin, quickly dissolving into a thick, choking paranoia. "Detective, what if he finds out anyway?" Sarah's voice trembled, threatening to shatter. "What if he comes here? To finish it?" Miller's tone was iron. "He won't. I've got 2 uniforms outside your door, 24/7. You are safe. I promise." Sarah clung to that promise like a prayer. "There's one more thing," the detective added, an unusual hesitation coloring her professional tone. "What?" Sarah asked, her stomach plummeting. "It's your son. It's Caleb." Caleb, her 32-year-old son. He had always been in his father's orbit, working for Connor's company, always with his hand out. "What about him?" Sarah pushed, a cold dread coiling inside her. The detective sighed. "Sarah, he knew about the mistress he's known for over a year." The hospital room, the world, everything dissolved into a silent, nauseating spin. "What?" Miller's voice was gentle but unrelenting. "We found the text between him and Connor. Caleb knew everything about Jessica, and now he's agreed to testify for his father." He was going to stand before a judge and spin a fantasy about his parents' perfect, loving marriage. The air evacuated Sarah's lungs in a painful rush. Her son, her own boy, was choosing to stand with the man who had tried to murder her. "And Brittany," she choked out, her daughter's name fracturing on her lips. "Brittany is frantic," Miller said. "She's been to the station 3 times in 2 days. She knows something is deeply, deeply wrong." Of course she knew. Brittany always knew. After hanging up, Sarah could only stare at the sterile white ceiling tiles. Jake sat in the chair beside her, a quiet, solid anchor in the swirling chaos. But there were no words that could touch this kind of pain. Connor had almost found her, a chilling reminder of how close she'd come to disappearing. But that wasn't the wound that bled the most. The deepest cut, the one that truly broke her, was the knowledge that her own son had seen it all and had chosen his side. Sleep was a country she couldn't visit that night, her mind replaying the detective's words in the suffocating dark. Her son knew. For more than a year, while Caleb watched his father slowly dismantle their family, he had kept his silence. The question of why was a hot poker in Sarah's mind. She drifted through a lifetime of memories, searching for the fault line, the precise moment the bond with her son had cracked. Caleb was always his father's shadow, a miniature version of Connor, even as a little boy. He idolized him, a detail that now seemed grotesque, a warning she had failed to see. He would beg to tag along on Connor's business trips, his eyes shining with adoration when his father returned with some flashy new gadget just for him. He would echo Connor's opinions on everything from politics to people, treating his father's words as absolute truth. Sarah had dismissed it as simple hero worship, a son looking up to his dad. What could be the harm in that? Everything. The harm was everything. Those trips Caleb was so desperate to join weren't meetings, they were trysts. Connor hadn't just lied to his son, he had recruited him. He had paid for Caleb's silence with cash and expensive toys, grooming him to be a willing accomplice in the destruction of his own mother. And Caleb had taken the deal. He chose the easy path because the money was good and because his father had never taught him the first thing about integrity. A wave of guilt, sharp and sickening, crashed over Sarah. She was also to blame. She had been so focused on building her business, the one that actually supported them, while Connor played the part of a CEO. In her drive to provide, she had unknowingly outsourced the moral education of her son to a monster. But Brittany was another story. She had always been forged from a different metal. From the moment she could walk, she was Sarah's echo. When Sarah opened her first tiny clothing shop in a flea market stall, an 8-year-old Brittany would sit on a stool behind the register, doing her homework, her wide, perceptive eyes soaking in every single detail of her mother's world. Let's talk about Connor. Today's story is about him and the picture-perfect family he systematically tried to erase. His wife, Sarah, was a force of nature who spun a small boutique into an empire from sheer grit. And their daughter, Brittany? She was born with an old soul. There's a story Sarah tells. A customer leaves the shop crying, and a very young Brittany asks why. Sarah gives a vague answer. Her husband did something mean, sweetie. But Brittany pushes back. What did he do? Sarah tries the classic parent dodge. It's grown-up stuff. Brittany's response was chilling. She looked her mother right in the eye. I don't want to understand when I'm older. I want to help her now. By 12, that same kid was basically managing the store's inventory. She was a prodigy of logistics, a natural with numbers and patterns. She would stalk the aisles, her mind a flawless ledger of every shirt, every dress. She possessed a stunning, almost photographic recall for the stock. She'd approach her mother, her expression serious, and state, Mom, we're short 3 of the blue blouses in a medium, and the last shipment from that supplier was missing 2 skirt. Sarah, completely baffled, would ask her, how in the world could you possibly know that? And Brittany would just shrug, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, and say, I counted. By 15, she commanded the sales floor with a poise that felt years beyond her age. The women who filtered through the doors of Sarah's boutiques weren't just customers. They were converts. She had an almost magnetic quality, a rare talent for simply listening, for absorbing the quiet tragedies of their lives and making them feel seen. These were women weathering their own private wars, and in that little shop, they found a moment of peace. Through them, Sarah's daughter, Brittany, heard the raw, unvarnished truth about marriage, the chronicles of broken trust, the slow burning pain of betrayal. She listened to stories of women who had poured everything they were into a family, only to be cast aside. It was little wonder, then, that one afternoon, Brittany turned to her mother, a new fire in her eyes, and said, Mom, I know exactly what I want to do. I'm going to be a family law attorney. Why that, sweetie? Sarah had asked, intrigued. Brittany's response would later echo with a chilling prescience. Because I have to help them, she said, her voice tight with a fierce, protective instinct. I want to fight for those women and get them the justice they've earned. Sarah had pulled her in for a hug, her chest swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. She couldn't possibly have known that she was looking at her own future savior, that she would one day become one of those very women. The first tremor that threatened Jake's picture-perfect world came when Brittany was 16. She found her mother in the kitchen and told her she'd seen her father, her perfect father, Jake, with another woman. But Sarah was insulated by a decade of carefully constructed belief. Denial was her fortress. She didn't just brush it off. She turned on her own child, branding her a liar, accusing her of inventing stories to lash out over some petty teenage argument. Brittany never spoke of it again. But a wound like that doesn't just heal, it scars over. Something in her gaze shifted when she looked at Jake. A nearly invisible barrier rose between them, and she began to navigate around him, her words clipped and reserved for only the most necessary exchanges. And Sarah, trapped inside her own desperate refusal to see, simply pretended it wasn't happening. It was just easier. At 18, Brittany left for college, a pre-law student on a mission. Then, at 23, she stumbled, failing the bar exam on her first attempt. The blow was devastating. She called Sarah, her voice ragged with sobs, utterly convinced she was a failure. But Sarah, a woman who had spun a multi-location business from a stall at a flea market, understood grit. She spoke to her daughter with unshakable resolve. Brittany, listen to me. You get back up, you wipe your tears, and you do it again. It's what we do. It's what I've always done. And that's precisely what she did. Brittany rose from the ashes of her own disappointment, attacked the books with a renewed vengeance, and passed. By 30, she was no longer just a lawyer. She was a legend in the local circuit, a feared and revered attorney who took on the ugliest cases, the brutal domestic violence suits, the divorces so toxic they were radioactive. She had become a champion for women just like the ones from the boutique, women deceived and broken by men precisely like her father. And she was terrifyingly good at her job. Sarah and Brittany's bond was the one constant in their lives. They spoke every single day, their weekly lunch a sacred ritual. Brittany was Sarah's anchor, her closest confidant, the only person on earth who could read the weather in her mother's soul. She could detect a storm in Sarah's voice before a single drop of rain fell, and celebrated her victories with a joy that was pure and absolute. "Mom, you're my absolute hero," Brittany had told her once during a Sunday brunch, her expression full of genuine awe. "You started with nothing but a table at a flea market and built this entire world with 3 boutiques. I just hope I can be like you someday." Sarah had waved it off with a laugh. "You already are, honey, and your league's better than me." Brittany had just smiled. Impossible? Now, lying in the sterile silence of a hospital bed, the reality of the chasm Jake had torn through her family was brutally clear. Her son Connor had chosen the money. He had chosen his father. But Brittany had chosen her mother. And now, with Sarah hidden away, shattered and alone, Connor was preparing to legally defend the man who put her there. All while Brittany was burning down the world looking for her, Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had to speak to her. She had to unravel the entire tapestry of Jake's lies. Detective Miller agreed, giving her the go-ahead and confirming what Sarah's heart already knew. Brittany was a rock, and she would be an essential weapon in the war to come. Late that afternoon, her phone lit up. "Brittany." "Honey," Sarah whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. "Mom. Oh my God, Mom." The sound that ripped through the speaker was not a cry. It was a pure, visceral howl of grief and relief. Brittany was sobbing, a broken, desperate noise Sarah had never imagined could come from her fiercely composed daughter. Detective Miller just told me. Oh, thank God. I was so scared. Mom, I thought you were gone. I'm here, baby, Sarah breathed, the tears finally breaking free and streaming down her own cheeks. I'm alive. I knew it, Brittany wept, her voice raw. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Mom, when you didn't answer my calls, when that goodnight text never came, I felt this awful, suffocating dread right here in my chest. Sarah's sobs were uncontrollable now. I should have believed you, honey, all those years ago, 14 years ago, when you tried to tell me what you saw. It's a dense, heavy silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of Brittany's frantic, ragged breaths. You remember that? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I never stopped remembering it, not for one single day, Brittany. I couldn't let it be true, and I am so, so incredibly sorry. I'm sorry I didn't listen, Sarah wept, for calling you a liar. God, Brittany, for choosing him over my own daughter. Brittany's voice was a storm of conflicting emotions. No, Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for backing down, for not shaking you until you saw him for what he was. Forgive you. You have to forgive me, honey. You saw the truth from the very start, and I was such a blind fool. You were not a fool, Brittany said, a shard of the fierce lawyer cutting through her tears. You were a wife who trusted her husband. There is no crime in that. There was everything wrong with it, honey. And I nearly paid for that trust with my life. Brittany's immediate response was primal. She wanted to get in her car that instant, to burn up the highway to New Haven and wrap her mother in her arms, to shield her from everything. Not yet, honey, Sarah said, a new steel entering her voice. Detective Miller has a strategy. There's a court date in 5 days. I am going to walk into that courtroom alive and whole, with an arsenal of proof against your father. What court date? Brittany asked, her confusion palpable. And so Sarah laid out Jake's entire, audacious plan. Jake was petitioning the court for emergency control of her assets. He was weaving a masterful story about her sudden, tragic disappearance, claiming he needed access to her funds to finance a desperate, large-scale search for the wife he loved so dearly. I'll be there, Brittany stated, and in that single moment, the entire dynamic shifted. The weeping daughter vanished, replaced by the formidable attorney. No, honey, you don't need to do that. I am going to be your counsel at that hearing, Mom, she interrupted, her tone like forged steel, leaving no room for negotiation. You're the one who showed me what strength looks like. You taught me how to get back up and fight, she continued, her voice swelling with a righteous power. You were the one who told me to dust myself off and go again. Well, now it's my turn to do that for you. So don't you even think for a second about arguing with me. Sarah began to cry again, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of profound gratitude, of a pride that was almost painful, and of a love for her daughter so immense it felt like a physical presence in her chest. What did I ever do in my life to deserve you? She whispered. And Brittany's answer was clear, true, and devastatingly simple. You raised me, she said. That's what you did. 2 days before the court date, Detective Miller arrived at the hospital, and she was not empty-handed. She was carrying the ammunition they were about to use against Jake, a thick manila folder overflowing with damning proof, high-definition security footage, printouts of damning text messages, and even a signed, notarized confession from the pharmacist Jake had used as his pawn. "The plan is straightforward," she said, arranging the documents on the bedside table, creating a mosaic of Jake's treachery. "Jake has filed a motion for emergency access to your finances," Miller explained, her tone crisp and professional. "He's telling the court you've disappeared into thin air, and he requires the money to mount a search." Sarah let out a dark, hollow sound that was not a laugh. "The irony is almost poetic. He engineers my vanishing act, and now he wants my own money to pretend to look for me." "Precisely," Miller affirmed. "The hearing is set for this Thursday at 2 p.m. Manhattan Courthouse. You will walk in there, alive, fully coherent, with your memory perfectly intact. And carrying all of this," Sarah added, motioning toward the mountain of evidence. The expression on his face, I can only imagine. "It will be better than you can imagine," Miller promised with a grim smile. "It's going to be one for the history books." From a chair in the corner, Sarah's old friend Mark watched it all unfold, his presence a quiet constant. He had not left her side once since the nightmare began, a silent, unwavering testament to the fact that good, decent men who were nothing like Jake, still walked the earth. Detective Miller let the silence hang in the sterile air for a moment, her eyes shifting from Liam and locking onto Ashley with a heavy professional sympathy. "There's another element to this," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's about your son, Nathan." A cold dread, sharp and immediate, coiled in Ashley's gut. "What about him?" The detective slid a new folder across the table. Inside were more printouts, screenshots of texts between Spencer and their son. They weren't recent. They stretched back for months, then years. Nathan hadn't just discovered the affair recently. That was a lie. And it wasn't the worst part. It wasn't even close. We've since learned that in the chaotic hours after Ashley was first hospitalized, the very first person Spencer called was their son, Nathan. He was already weaving his narrative, coaching the boy on the story they would tell. A marriage of perfect suburban bliss, a wife who had never once hinted at unhappiness or a desire to leave. And Nathan's reply, captured in a stark, damning screenshot: "I'm with you, Dad. I'll say the marriage was perfect." Those words aren't just a son backing his father. They're the chilling cornerstone of a conspiracy being built in real time. The investigation gained critical momentum once a warrant was secured to tap Spencer's phone. That's how they captured the audio that would change everything. Nathan's voice, startlingly clear and calm. The recording is sickening in its casualness. "Dad, did Mom suspect anything?" he asks, his tone as light as if he were asking about the weather. Spencer's voice returns, a smooth and reassuring balm of pure evil. "Don't worry. She didn't suspect a thing." But it's Nathan's next words that freeze the blood in your veins. He asks a cold, logistical question about whether his mother had found the poison, reducing her life to a mere inconvenience to be managed. The first time Ashley heard that recording, we're told she stumbled to the bathroom and was violently ill. It was more than a physical purge of the toxins still lingering in her system. It was the soul-deep revulsion of ultimate betrayal. To be marked for death by your husband is a singular kind of horror, but to hear your own child, the person you brought into this world, calmly discussing the mechanics of your murder, that is a darkness beyond comprehension. When she emerged, shaken, Liam was there to steady her. Her voice was just a fractured whisper. "I can't do it," she breathed. "I can't face them both in court. Not him, And not my son. I can't do this, Ashley whispered, the words cracking under the immense pressure of it all. Olivia said it was like watching the very last embers of her fight flicker and die out. I just want to be gone. I want to start over someplace new, so far away they could never find me. Liam and Olivia exchanged a helpless glance, silenced by the sheer depth of her despair. What could anyone possibly say to that? Then, a sharp buzz cut through the heavy air of the hospital room. A phone on the nightstand. Ashley answered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Chloe. Her daughter's concern was instantaneous, a palpable wave through the receiver. Mom, what's wrong? You don't sound right. I can hear it in your voice, Mom, Chloe insisted, her perception laser sharp. And so, the dam broke. Ashley told her everything about Spencer, the poison, the ice-cold text messages, and the audio recording that had damned a father and a son. A dense, suffocating silence filled the line. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice had transformed. The worried child was gone, replaced by a warrior forged in that moment. Mom, you need to listen to me right now, Chloe commanded, her tone suddenly steel. Ashley, utterly broken, tried to resist. Honey, I can't. Chloe's response was like a jolt of electricity. You can. Something in that voice, that unshakable certainty, made Ashley pause. I have spent 14 years of my life, Chloe stated, her voice layered with the weight of every single one of those years. Knowing Dad was a bad man. 14 years of being told I was a liar, that I was being dramatic. I watched you defend him, so I learned to keep my mouth shut. My mouth. Oh, what could Ashley say? It was the devastating truth. And do you know why I never gave up on you? Chloe pressed on. Because you didn't give up on me when I failed the bar exam that first time. Remember what you said to me? Chloe challenged. Get up, dust yourself off, and go again. So I did, and I passed because of you. Another pause followed, but this one crackled with energy. So now it's my turn. Get up, Mom. Dust yourself off, walk into that courthouse, and you burn them to the ground. Fresh tears started to fall down Ashley's face, but they felt different. Not tears of despair, but tears of gasoline and fire. You built an entire business from a single box of clothes at a flea market. Chloe's voice rang out, a powerful reminder of a strength Ashley had forgotten she possessed. You raised 2 kids, almost single-handedly while Dad was working late. You survived being poisoned by the person who was supposed to protect you. And you're telling me you can't face down a coward and his pathetic, spoiled son? And then a sound bubbled up through the tears that shocked everyone in the room. A laugh. It was a watery, broken sound, but it was undeniably real. One more thing, Mom, Chloe added, her voice sharp. If you don't go, I will. I will walk into that courtroom alone and I will dismantle them piece by agonizing piece. But I would so much rather have you sitting right there next to me. You deserve to see the look on their faces when they finally realize the game is over. We're told Ashley glanced at Liam and Olivia, who were listening with rapt attention. You're just like me, she said into the phone, a new foundation of strength in her voice. I know, Chloe replied. And that's why you're getting out of that bed and coming with me. Ashley took a long, grounding breath, wiping the dampness from her cheeks. When she spoke again, her voice was solid steel. Okay, honey, I'll go. A triumphant grin was almost audible through the line. That's my mom. That phone call was a lifeline that bought her 5 days. 5 days to prepare to face the man who tried to murder her and the son who was his accomplice. But she wouldn't be walking into that courtroom alone. She had Liam, Olivia, and her own personal champion, her daughter Chloe, by her side. Those 5 days leading up to the hearing were a special kind of agony. Physically, Ashley was slowly healing as the poison finally left her system. But the emotional shrapnel was lodged deep in her soul. She would wake up in the dead of night, sheets soaked in cold sweat, Spencer's whispered lies still echoing in her nightmares. During the day, the memories would ambush her without warning, the slightly bitter taste of her morning coffee, the sudden, terrifying weakness that buckled her knees, the profound betrayal of her own body failing her. Through every terrible second, Liam was her unwavering anchor. He refused to leave her side, sleeping in a stiff, unforgiving armchair by her hospital bed. He was always awake before her, fetching coffee from the downstairs cafeteria, and, in a quiet ritual of profound reassurance, he would always take the first sip in front of her. "You don't have to do that," she murmured on the third day. His response was achingly simple. "I know, but I need you to feel safe." They spent hours just talking, piecing together the unwritten chapters of the past few decades. She discovered depths to Liam she never knew existed. He had been married for 22 years to a woman named Kate, an oncologist who, in a display of life's cruelest irony, had died of cancer 3 years prior. "Life has a pretty dark sense of humor," he said, a familiar shadow briefly crossing his features. She dedicated her life to saving people from that disease, and in the end, it was the thing that took her from me. Ashley could still see the profound love for Kate alive in his eyes. She was my partner, my best friend. She was my everything. When she passed, I honestly didn't know how I could possibly go on, he admitted, his voice quiet with the memory of that pain. "But you did," Ashley said softly. "We always go on, Ashley. It's what we do." Hearing that shared truth, she felt a wall inside her crumble, and she began to speak of her own marriage to Spencer, of the gnawing loneliness and the tiny, persistent suspicions she had so meticulously buried over the years. Then Liam asked a question that cut right through to the bone. "You were never really happy with him, were you?" The question demanded a brutal honesty she hadn't yet afforded herself. Had she been happy? "I thought I was," she confessed, the words tasting strange. "Or maybe I was just used to it, you know? The routine, the company, the idea of what a family was supposed to look like." But true happiness, the kind that actually fills you up inside, I'm not sure I ever had that with him. And then Liam offered a gentle, profound correction. "Yes, you did. You told me about Chloe, about how she's your best friend. That's happiness, Ashley. That's the real thing." And he was right. Of course he was right. Chloe was her happiness. That anchor had always been there, holding her fast, even in the storm she didn't know was raging. On the fourth night, sleep was a distant shore she couldn't reach. Liam pulled his armchair closer to her bed. "Ashley," he began, his voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," she whispered back into the darkness. "Do you remember senior prom? That night, out in the school garden?" She closed her eyes, and slowly the memory began to surface from the deep. It was June, 1983, and the high school gym throbbed with the end of everything that had ever mattered. A universe of blue and white balloons swayed under the cheap lights, the air thick with hairspray and the relentless, driving bass of a song that already felt like nostalgia. She was nursing a cup of flat punch when Nathan materialized beside her, and the sight of him was a quiet shock. He looked utterly remade. The usual rumpled t-shirt was gone, replaced by a starched button-down. His thick hair, for once, was tamed. He'd even ditched the glasses that usually hid half his face. "Ashley, could I steal you for a minute? Somewhere quiet?" Her friends were a tangled mess of limbs on the dance floor, lost to the music. No one would even see her go. "Of course, Nathan. What's on your mind?" He guided her out a side door into the school's forgotten garden, into a perfect summer night where the smell of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air and the moon felt like a stage light. He stopped beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak, and she could feel a tremor running through him. "Ashley, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it? Are you okay?" she asked, a flicker of real concern cutting through the party haze. "I am. No, not really," he stammered, his breath catching in his chest. "I ran through this 1,000 times in my head, but seeing you here, all the words are gone." A genuine laugh escaped her then. "Breathe, Nathan. It's only me. You can say anything." He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw a deep, unguarded vulnerability there that was entirely new. "Ashley, we've been friends for 3 years," he started, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "And for every single one of those years, you've been the most important person in my life. You were the one who stood up for me. You were the one who could make me laugh when I felt like the world was ending. You made me feel like I wasn't invisible," he continued, laying his soul bare in the silver moonlight as her own heart began to hammer against her ribs. "I don't know any other way to say this, but—" He took a half step closer, the nervous energy coming off him in waves. "Ashley, I—" At that exact moment, the blast of a car horn ripped the fragile silence to shreds. A gleaming red muscle car had idled up to the curb, and leaning against it with a world-conquering smirk was Kyle. "Ashley, let's go! I'll drive you home." Kyle, the star quarterback, the boy who occupied the daydreams of half the school, had suddenly decided she was the one he wanted. She threw a glance back at Nathan, her kind, awkward friend, who was trembling on the edge of a precipice. "Sorry, Nathan," she said, already moving toward the car, toward the easy, bright future it represented. "We can talk later." With that, she turned her back. She didn't see the look of utter ruin that washed over his face. Didn't know that later would be a promise left broken for 4 decades, only to be revisited in the hushed, antiseptic air of a hospital room. She blinked her eyes open. "I was going to ask you to be my girlfriend that night," Nathan said, his voice heavy with the phantom weight of that memory. "I was going to tell you I'd been in love with you since I was 14, that you were the most fiercely brilliant person I'd ever met, that all I wanted was to spend my life trying to make you happy," he finished, his words falling into the charged silence. And then Kyle pulled up with that stupid car and that perfect smile, and you just evaporated. "I didn't know," she breathed, the words feeling thin and useless. "Nathan, I swear, I had no idea." "I know," he said softly. "You were a kid, and he was, well, he was Kyle." A thick, unspoken history settled between them. "I stood in that garden for an hour after you drove off," he admitted, trying to understand what was so wrong with me. "That night changed my entire life. I decided I would become someone you couldn't ignore, a doctor, someone respected, someone powerful. I would finally prove that I was good enough." "You never had to prove a thing to anybody," she insisted, her voice cracking. I see that now, he replied. But back then, all I knew was that you chose him because he was better. And I have spent 40 years trying to win a race that was over before I even left the starting line. Do you regret it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not saying it anyway, not fighting for it. His reply was instant, stripped of all hesitation, every single day, for my entire life. He offered a broken smile, but something new was glinting in his eyes, a flicker of an old, dangerous hope. But this feels like a second chance, and I am not about to waste it. As if summoned by his words, the next day, Chloe arrived. Ashley heard her first, the sharp, determined click of heels echoing down the long, sterile corridor. When the door swung open, it was her daughter, but she too seemed transformed. Chloe stood framed in the doorway, a warrior in a tailored black pantsuit, her hair twisted into a severe knot, a leather briefcase clutched in her hand. She radiated an intimidating, focused energy. But the moment her gaze found her mother's, the formidable armor disintegrated. Mom. The word was a shattered breath as she surged forward, collapsing onto the bed and wrapping her arms around her mother in a hug that felt less like affection and more like survival. It was the desperate, clinging embrace of someone who had stared into the abyss. Oh my God, Mom, Chloe sobbed, burying her face into Ashley's shoulder. I was so scared, and thank God you're here. And Ashley just held her, pouring what little strength she possessed back into her child. I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere. They clung to each other, letting tears and silence speak what words never could. That reunion was the end of one nightmare, a gut-wrenching collision between a mother and daughter who thought they had been torn apart forever. But once the tears subsided, Chloe's entire demeanor shifted. She pulled back, wiped her eyes, and her spine straightened into a rod of steel. The attorney was back in the room. Tell me everything, she commanded, her voice cold and precise. She demanded every single detail of what her mother, Ashley, had endured. Every piece of evidence from Detective Miller, every agonizing second of the ordeal. And as Ashley recounted the story, Chloe's pen flew across a legal pad, her sharp, analytical mind already constructing the case, brick by brutal brick. It was like watching a master strategist plan a war. Ashley watched the familiar fire ignite in her daughter's eyes, a flare of immense pride cutting through her pain. When the full story was finally laid bare, Chloe looked up from her notes. The strategy is simple, she declared, her tone absolute. We let him go first. We let Nathan have his moment. The grieving husband, frantic with worry, pleading with the court for any news of his missing wife. A small, sharp smile played on Chloe's lips, a look Ashley recognized as utterly devastating. It was the expression she wore just before she methodically dismantled a witness on the stand. I'll enter the courtroom first, as your counsel. You wait outside. When the judge asks for the victim's representation, I'll introduce myself. And then you will walk in. The sheer, righteous theatricality of the plan was breathtaking. And Nathan? Nathan is going to have a complete and total meltdown. Not a genuine one, sadly, Chloe added with a touch of dark humor. But the look on his face will be worth every second of this hell. And then we have Spencer. The victorious smile fell from Chloe's face at the mention of her brother's name, her expression hardening into something cold and unforgiving. Spencer made his choice, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He backed the wrong side, and it's time he learned there are consequences. A deep, primal ache shot through Ashley's chest. That was her son. Even after a betrayal this profound, the bond was still there. Chloe, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can't look at him. Facing Nathan is one thing, but Spencer. Chloe's hand shot out, her grip on her mother's arm a grounding force. Mom, listen to me. Spencer knew. He knew for over a year that Dad was cheating. And he did more than just keep quiet. He actively agreed to testify for him, to lie for him, to completely throw you away. Ashley started to protest, a reflexive, I know, but Chloe sliced through her words. No, there is no but here, Mom, she stated, her voice ironclad. He chose the money. He chose the monthly allowance, the downtown condo Dad pays for, the entire spoiled existence Dad bankrolled. He sold you out so he wouldn't have to get a job, she said, contempt dripping from every word. Ashley fell silent, crushed by the weight of such an ugly truth. And while he was cashing Dad's checks, Chloe pressed on, her voice rising with righteous fury. While he was making the conscious choice to be his father's son, I was at the police station 3 times in 48 hours, begging Detective Miller to let me join the search parties. I was staying up all night, chasing down dead ends and crying in a bathroom stall at work because I truly believed my mother was dead. Sources say tears carved silent tracks down Brittany's cheeks, yet her voice was a steel wire, unwavering. I was always in your corner, Mom. Always. Even at 16, when I tried to warn you about Dad and you wouldn't see it. Even then, I never wrote you off, not once. Because that is what family is for. In that moment, Jessica simply folded her daughter into her arms, clutching her as if she were the last bastion of hope in the world. My girl, she murmured into her hair, my fierce little warrior. I know, honey, I know, Jessica breathed, her whisper thick with the weight of a wasted decade. And I am so profoundly sorry. Sorry for not hearing you, for choosing him time and again. You deserved a better mother. I had the best mother, Brittany countered, pulling away just enough to lock eyes with her. He just had you under a spell, but you're awake now, and together we are going to make him answer for everything. Later, though, Jessica faced a different kind of crucible, introducing her daughter to Chris. She later confided that she hadn't felt that kind of raw nerve anxiety in ages. Brittany was her anchor, her advocate, the one person whose good opinion she valued above all others. And Chris. Chris was the man who had found her, who had quite literally saved her, and who was gently teaching her that her story might not be over. For a small eternity, Brittany just watched him, her prosecutor's gaze dismantling him piece by piece, searching for a flaw, a tell, a single red flag. Then, against all odds, a genuine smile spread across her face. So, she began, dispensing with all pleasantries, you're the one who saved my mom. Chris just gave a slight shake of his head, a flush of embarrassment on his cheeks. I was just in the right place at the right time. No, it was more, Brittany corrected, her tone leaving no room for argument. Detective Miller gave me the full rundown. You skipped your work conference. You stayed with her at the hospital for days. You watched over her as if she was... She paused, searching for the perfect description. As if she was someone who mattered. She is someone who matters, Chris said, the words simple, absolute, his gaze fixed on Jessica. She always has been. And Brittany slowly turned to her mother. Jessica saw it instantly in her daughter's expression, a wave of acceptance, of deep relief, of unconditional approval. Mom, I like him, Brittany declared, with her typical lack of a filter. He looks at you the right way. Jessica felt a jolt of surprise. The right way. Brittany gave a firm nod. Yeah, the way Dad never did. There was nothing Jessica could say to that, so she just let a true, unburdened smile bloom. That night, on the edge of sleep, she heard her bedroom door creak open. Mom, are you awake? I am now. What's going on, sweetie? Brittany sat on the bed's edge, a familiar posture that threw Jessica back 20 years to childhood nightmares and scraped knees. I need to tell you something about your son, about Jake. Instantly, Jessica was bolt upright, a cold dread coiling low in her stomach. What about him? Around 6 months ago, Brittany began. I ran into him at a cafe. You know we're not close, but he was alone, so I went over to be polite. She drew a long, careful breath, as if the memory itself was a burden. We did the usual dance. Work is fine, life is fine, all the empty family chatter. But after a moment, she continued, I noticed he was acting off. He was just pushing food around his plate with a fork, not taking a single bite. It was clear something was gnawing at him from the inside out. What did he talk about? Jessica pressed, leaning forward. He asked about you, if you were okay. If you and I still had our weekly lunch dates, it was just so bizarre, you know? Coming from him, a guy who never showed an ounce of interest in things like that. Jessica felt her own pulse quicken. Then he said something that has haunted me ever since. He looked right at me and said, Brittany, sometimes I see Mom and I think we should have done more. We should have been there for her. We should have spoken up. Spoken up about what? Jessica whispered. My exact question, Brittany confirmed with a nod. And he just completely clammed up, started messing with his water glass, avoiding my eyes, the whole textbook avoidance routine. You could practically see the war waging inside him, Brittany recalled. Like this massive truth was right there on his tongue, desperate to get out, but he just couldn't let it go. She met her mother's gaze, her own eyes filled with a fiery intensity. So, I pushed him. I asked him directly, Jake, what do you know? What are you keeping from me? And he almost broke, Mom. I swear he did. I saw him open his mouth, draw this huge breath, and then he just snapped it shut. He just closed his mouth, Brittany repeated, the frustration still palpable in her voice months later. He flagged down the waiter for the check and muttered some pathetic excuse about a late meeting. But I saw it, Mom. He was going to confess. He was about to expose everything. Dad, his affair, all of it. Then why didn't he? Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. Brittany exhaled, a long, mournful sound. Because at that precise moment, his phone lit up. It was Dad. And the instant he saw that name on the screen, his face just crumbled. I think it was terror. Or maybe it was just pure shame, Brittany mused, her eyes distant. He answered, just said, I'm on my way, and vanished. No real goodbye. He's a coward, Mom. That's the bottom line. He's always been one. He will always choose the easy lie over the painful truth. He'll always choose Dad's approval over his own conscience. That afternoon, he had a chance to be a hero, and he chose to walk away. Do you think he regrets it? Jessica asked, a fragile sliver of maternal hope in her tone. I think he'll regret it tomorrow morning when he watches you walk into that courtroom, Brittany stated, her voice ironclad with conviction. I think he will live with that regret for the rest of his life. Silence settled over the room for a long while. Mom, I know this is an impossible thing to face. He is your son, but he made his choice. And now he has to live with the consequences. I know. Jessica finally managed to say. I know. Brittany simply pulled her mother into an embrace. It's all right to break now, Mom. I'm right here. I've got you. This is what we do for each other. And Jessica finally let go. She wept for the 33 years she had unknowingly devoted to a lie. She wept for the husband who had betrayed her and the son who had enabled him. She wept for that single pivotal moment in a quiet cafe when her son could have saved her and chose not to. She wept for the woman she once was and for the fighter she was about to become. My sources confirm Brittany stayed by her mother's side through that entire harrowing night. As dawn broke over the skyline, something inside Jessica had been forged anew. She was ready, ready to step back into the flames, ready to seize back her own narrative. And she was utterly prepared to confront the two men, her husband and her son, who had conspired to simply erase her from the world. The Manhattan family court that Thursday was a study in managed chaos, a low symphony of quiet agony. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried through marble corridors. Fractured families waited in heavy silence, and clerks rushed past with armloads of files, each containing a life torn apart. The air itself in that building seems to carry weight. It's thick with the sharp click of heels, the echo of hushed conversations against impossibly high ceilings, and the unspoken pressure of futures being rewritten behind massive, imposing wooden doors. Jessica was in a car parked just down the block with Brittany and their friend Chris. Detective Miller was already inside, preparing the ground. The hearing was set for 2 in the afternoon. The car's clock read 1:45. Mom, check in. How are you holding up? Brittany asked. Jessica turned to her daughter, a woman who seemed sculpted from granite. Brittany wore a severe black pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a tight professional knot, her makeup understated yet perfect. She looked less like a daughter and more like a general heading into a decisive battle, armed with a winning strategy. Nervous, Jessica confessed, her voice thin. Yes, extremely. Of course you are. That's only human, Brittany replied, her tone impossibly level. But you have absolutely no reason to be afraid. I will be right next to you for every single second of this. From her other side, Chris gave her hand a gentle, firm squeeze. Jessica, he said, his voice a steadying anchor. Think about what you have already endured. It's staggering. You woke up in that hospital when every single expert said you had lost everything. But you are here. You are breathing. And you are about to fight. Just walking through those doors today, that is a greater victory than you can possibly know. She drew a shuddering breath, trying to calm the wild hammering in her ribs. He was right. The worst was over. And now, it was time for the reckoning. Okay, she whispered. Let's go. They used a side entrance to enter the courthouse, a discreet path Miller had scouted to ensure her husband, Nathan, wouldn't catch a premature glimpse of the woman he thought he had destroyed. 2 flights of worn linoleum stairs led to a third-floor hallway that smelled of dust and stale coffee. A corridor so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. They paused before a heavy oak door, a polished brass number 7 glinting under the harsh lighting. Just as Sarah's hand began to tremble, Detective Spencer materialized from the shadows of a recessed doorway. This is it, he said, his voice a low rumble. Fair warning, they've already started. Nathan's in there giving the performance of his career. The question was a knot of glass in Sarah's throat. Is Ashton with him? Spencer's nod was grim, a silent confirmation of her deepest fear. Right there in the gallery, ready to swear to every lie his father tells. A cold dread coiled in Sarah's stomach, but she forced it down, burying it deep beneath a layer of ice. And Ashley? Spencer considered it for a moment. Didn't see her. She wasn't on the witness docket. Okay, Sarah breathed, and the sound was no longer fragile. It was the sharp, clean sound of steel being drawn. Let's end this. Her daughter, Brooke, squared her shoulders, the fabric of her dark pantsuit settling perfectly. She took her briefcase in one hand and stepped directly in front of her mother, a human shield. Mom, look at me. When I go in, I need you to count to 10. Slowly, then you come in. You don't look at Nathan. You don't even look in Ashton's direction. You look right at me, Brooke commanded, her voice soft but absolute. I'm your anchor. Understand? Sarah could only manage a tight, jerky nod. And Mom? Yes? A smile touched Brooke's lips, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp and predatory. Enjoy every single second. Then she turned, pushed the courtroom door open, and walked in as if she were marching into battle. Sarah began to count. 1, a beat of her own heart. 2, the man who promised to love her. 3, the son she raised. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She pushed the door open and stepped into the wreckage of her life. The room was smaller than she'd imagined, more like a conference room than a courtroom. A large table dominated the center where the judge presided, and to the left, there was Nathan, with his lawyer. To the right sat a single solitary chair, the one reserved for the victim, for her. Her own son, Ashton, occupied the front row of the gallery, his posture a mirror of his father's false confidence. The moment the latch on the door clicked behind Sarah, the world seemed to stop on its axis. Nathan was mid-sentence, his voice weaving a tragic tale of a heartbroken man, desperately petitioning the court for access to his wife's assets to fund the search for the woman he adored, the woman who had vanished without a trace. His voice was a practiced symphony of sorrow, dripping with a manufactured grief that was both convincing and utterly vile. And then his eyes, those familiar blue eyes, drifted from the judge and landed on the open doorway. They landed on her. My source in the courtroom that day says you could practically see the blood drain from Nathan's face, leaving behind a waxy gray pallor. His eyes widened in sheer, animal terror. His mouth fell open, working silently, a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. Sarah. It wasn't a word, just a strangled puff of air, a ghost's whisper of a name he thought he'd buried. But she gave him nothing, not a flicker of recognition. She held her gaze on her daughter, just as she'd been told. Brooke approached the judge's table with the kind of lethal calm you see in seasoned prosecutors. Your Honor, her voice sliced through the stunned silence that had fallen over the room. My name is Brooke Peterson. I am an attorney, New York State Bar number 287451, and I am here today representing the victim in this matter. The judge, a man in his 60s with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, shifted his gaze from Brooke to the empty victim's chair, and finally to the ghost standing in his doorway. His expression was a priceless mix of profound shock and raw, unfiltered curiosity. Now, a colleague of mine was in that room, thinking he was there to cover a dry probate hearing, a standard petition to declare a missing person legally dead to access their accounts. But he'd received a tip, a whisper that this case was about to explode. Nathan Peterson was there, playing the role of the distraught husband with an Oscar-worthy performance. And then the door swung open. The missing woman, Sarah Peterson, walked right in, flanked by her daughter. The judge peered over the top of his spectacles, his mind clearly struggling to catch up. "Mr. Peterson," he began, his voice laced with confusion, "I was under the impression you testified that your wife had disappeared." Nathan just stared, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror. He couldn't form a single word. The man honestly looked like he'd just seen his own damnation walk through the door. His lawyer, a sheen of panicked sweat appearing on his brow, scrambled to his feet. "Your Honor, there has obviously been a grave misunderstanding." But Brooke Peterson cut him off, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "Oh, there's been no misunderstanding," she announced to the captivated room. "But there has been an attempted murder, a poisoning, and a conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud. And I have brought proof of every single allegation." A wave of sharp gasps and frantic whispers swept through the gallery. The judge's gavel came down with a deafening crack. "Silence in this court! Miss Peterson, you must realize those are monumentally serious accusations." "I am fully aware, Your Honor, which is why I've come prepared." With that, Brooke snapped open her briefcase, and what followed was a clinical, methodical demolition. She began distributing thick, spiral-bound binders, and with each one that landed on the table, another nail was hammered into her father's coffin. I've seen the contents: printed copies of texts between Nathan and a woman named Ashley, damning screenshots of encrypted messages with his own son, Ashton, a notarized confession from a local pharmacist, and detailed medical reports from a clinic halfway across the country. It was a perfectly documented avalanche of his guilt. "This document," she declared, her hand rock steady as she held a sheet of paper aloft, "is the pharmacy receipt for the benzodiazepine derivative the defendant used to poison my mother. This is the forged prescription he used to obtain it, and this,"
Hmm?
she let the silence stretch, twisting the knife, "is the toxicology report confirming that exact substance was in her system. But this is the moment he put it there." She held up a small silver flash drive. "This is security footage of the defendant drugging my mother's coffee at the Port Authority bus terminal on March 12th of this year." Brooke inserted the drive into the court's laptop, and the monitors positioned around the room flickered to life. The footage was grainy, the way security tapes always are, but the image was brutally clear. There he was, Nathan Peterson, glancing nervously over his shoulder before deftly tipping a fine white powder from a folded piece of paper into a steaming coffee cup. Then you see him slide it across the table to Sarah, his wife, with a smile. A casual, loving smile that turned the blood to ice in your veins. "You can clearly say the defendant administering the substance," Brooke narrated, her voice an emotionless monotone. "And here," she skipped the footage forward, "you can see him assisting the victim, who is visibly disoriented, onto a bus. Notice how she's struggling to maintain her balance." The video jumped again. And this is the defendant, less than a minute later, walking away from that same bus terminal without a single backward glance, leaving the victim behind him, drugged and helpless with a one-way ticket to Omaha, Nebraska, under the alias Emily Ross. The silence in the courtroom was so absolute it felt like a physical weight. I was watching the judge's face, and it was a mask of cold, controlled fury, the look of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and was seeing it again right now. He slowly, deliberately turned his gaze to Nathan Peterson. Mr. Peterson, is there anything at all you wish to say in your defense? When Nathan's voice finally emerged, the smooth, confident baritone was gone, replaced by the thin, reedy plea of a man watching his world burn down around him. Your Honor, it's a lie. My wife is confused. She's been through something terrible. She doesn't know what she's saying. It was then that Sarah spoke for the first time, and her voice cut through the suffocating tension like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head in that room swiveled to face her. I know exactly what I am saying, she said, and her eyes for the first time locked onto her husband's. I know you told me the coffee was a special blend. I know you leaned in, and I know you whispered that in 1 hour I wouldn't even be able to remember my own name. I know you used our credit card to buy a one-way bus ticket to Omaha for a woman named Emily Ross, to ship me off to the middle of nowhere with no memory, no identification, and no one to call. Her voice was like tempered steel now, impossibly strong. I know about your affair with Ashley. I know you're in debt for nearly $1 million to a loan shark. And I know you orchestrated this entire nightmare for one simple reason: to get your hands on my money. The money from the company I started from my kitchen table, from the retail stores I built from the ground up, the assets I grew while you were off playing CEO of a shell corporation that never made a single dime. Nathan Peterson was bone white, trembling visibly, a sick, oily sheen of sweat coating his forehead. Sarah, my love, just listen to me. I can explain everything. Don't you ever call me your love again. She spat, the words cracking like a bullwhip. You lost that right when you decided my life was worth less than your bad investments. Brooke moved to stand beside her mother, a protective hand resting on her shoulder. Your Honor, in addition to the documentary evidence, we have corroborating testimony. The pharmacist who illegally filled the forged prescription has already provided a full, taped confession to Detective Spencer. And, she paused, her gaze flicking deliberately toward the gallery. We also have the testimony of the defendant's son, Ashton Peterson, who has been aware of his father's affair for over a year and who agreed to perjure himself in this court today. It was the moment the world stopped turning for Connor Peterson. Seated in the witness chair, he seemed to physically shrink, the color leaching from his face until his skin was the color of old parchment. He began to stammer, a broken, I didn't. That was swallowed by the courtroom's heavy silence. His sister, Brittany, fixed him with a look that could have frozen fire. We found the messages, Connor, she stated, her voice devoid of pity. We have the audio. We heard you ask, Dad, does Mom suspect anything? Does that sound familiar? You could almost see the gears grinding to a halt behind his eyes. He was cornered. His mouth hung open, but the words wouldn't come. Brittany, having delivered the fatal blow, turned to the judge, her voice resonating with cold clarity. Your Honor, we move for the defendant, Jake Peterson, to be taken into custody, and we are formally requesting an investigation into Connor Peterson for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Of the judge, a man whose face was etched with the grim realities of his profession, gave a single sharp nod. Motion granted. Bailiff. Before he could finish, the courtroom doors flew open with a deafening crash. A woman, a caricature of a mistress with her platinum hair and painted-on dress, came hurtling into the room screaming, Jake! Jake, what's going on? She was a missile locked on the defendant's table, utterly oblivious to the fact that she had just run into the epicenter of a detonation, completely unaware that she was running toward the very woman her lover had tried to erase. Her frantic eyes finally found me, and you could practically watch her reality shatter in real time. First came the flicker of confusion, then the horrifying click of recognition, and finally, a wave of primal fear. You, you're alive, she whispered. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. Surprise. The woman, Ashley, staggered backward as if I'd struck her. I didn't know, she pleaded, her voice cracking. He told me you were just divorcing. He swore to me that everything was fine. It was Brittany who answered, her tone dripping with venom. He promised a lot of things, didn't he? He promised he would leave my mother, promised he'd get his finances straight, promised the two of you a new life together, and you drank down every last lie. Ashley's head whipped toward Jake, her eyes wide with a desperate appeal. Jake, do something! Tell them this isn't true! But Jake Peterson said nothing. He stared at the scuffed linoleum floor as if it held the secrets to the universe. A man hollowed out from the inside. Then, a roar erupted from him. Shut up, Ashley! It was the first sound he'd made, a violent crack in the calm, collected mask he'd worn all day. Ashley flinched, a full-body recoil from the force of his words. You promised me, she shrieked, her own composure unraveling. You promised we would finally be together. You said she would just be gone, and we could start our life, he bellowed again. I told you to shut up. But the dam had broken, and the truth was now a flood. You told me the drug would make her forget everything. She'd be a Jane Doe somewhere, and no one would ever know. You said all that money would finally belong to us. An absolute crushing silence fell over the courtroom. In that single panicked outburst, Ashley Hayes had just confessed, on the record, to her role in the entire grotesque affair. I saw him then. Detective Hayes, a plainclothes officer who had been a quiet presence at the back of the room, began a slow, deliberate walk toward her. Ashley Hayes, he said, his voice calm but firm. You are being detained as an accessory to attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, the detective continued, reciting the familiar words, can and will be used against you in a court of law. That's when the screaming began, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. I didn't do anything wrong. It was him. I just loved him. Two bailiffs flanked her, their hands on her arms as they began to lead her away. She was a whirlwind of hysteria, black mascara carving pathways through her foundation as her carefully constructed image crumbled into a million pieces. I watched them drag her out before my eyes snapped back to Jake. I took a single, measured step in his direction. So, that was her, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the still room. That's the woman you were willing to destroy my life for. The woman you decided was worth more than our 33 years together. My eyes raked over him, taking in the ruin of the man I once knew. She's not even that pretty. From somewhere in the gallery, a choked, disbelieving laugh broke the tension. What little color Jake had left drained away, replaced by a deep, mottled red of pure humiliation. And then his body gave up. In front of everyone, the judge, the lawyers, his own children, Jake Peterson's legs buckled. He didn't fall so much as crumple, landing on the courtroom floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Sarah, he rasped, his voice a pathetic, shredded thing. Sarah, please, forgive me. I know I messed everything up, but I love you. I swear to God, I still love you. I have always loved you. He sobbed. I just stood there, a statue of stillness, looking down at the man who had been my husband for over 3 decades, the man who had methodically fed me poison, intending to wipe my very identity from the world. And here he was, on his knees, begging me to be his salvation. Please, Sarah, just tell them you forgive me. Tell the judge it was all a horrible mistake. We can fix this, baby, he pleaded, reaching a trembling hand toward me. I know we can. We can go back. My voice was ice. Get up. He continued to sob. Sarah, please. Get up, I repeated. The words now sharpened to a fine point. He flinched but remained on the floor, his face a mess of tears. You want my pity? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You? The man who drew a blueprint for my destruction? Who was prepared to steal everything I ever built while I wandered the country without a name? You dare ask for pity from me? I gave you 33 years, I said, each word a heavy stone. 33 years of my life, my loyalty, my love, while your entire existence was a lie, and this was my reward. I took a deliberate step back, creating a physical and final chasm between us. Get off the floor, Jake. Get up and face me like a man. He struggled to his feet, a pathetic, trembling wreck. The charming man who had walked in that morning was gone forever. Now, I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a closing door, you will go to prison, and I will go on with my life, and I will find peace in knowing I never have to look at your face again. With that, I turned my back on him. Sarah! Sarah! He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation, but I didn't slow my pace. I kept walking as Detective Hayes stepped in with a set of handcuffs. I heard the detective's calm voice. Jake Peterson, you are under arrest for attempted murder, followed by the definitive metallic click of the cuffs closing. His shouts of my name followed me out, a broken mantra of his own making, but I never once looked back. As they passed me, Detective Hayes met my eyes for a brief moment. He'll rot in there, Sarah. I'll make sure of it. I know you will, I replied, my voice unwavering. The instant the courtroom door shut, sealing my husband's fate, my attention pivoted to the second, deeper betrayal. It turned to my son, Connor. He was a statue carved from shock, still sitting in the witness chair where his world had collapsed. He hadn't so much as blinked during the chaos of his father's arrest and Ashley's spectacular meltdown. Brittany stood beside me, her protective presence a shield. Connor, she said, her voice like shattering glass, do you have anything to say for yourself? He finally raised his head, and his tear-filled eyes met mine, the eyes of the mother he had been willing to sacrifice. Mom, I swear I didn't know he was going to do that, I promise. But you knew about the affair, I stated, the words leaving no room for argument. For more than a year, you knew. He stammered. I just didn't want to get in the middle of it. I thought you guys would figure it out. And when I went missing, I pressed, my voice relentless. When your father sold you that ridiculous story about me just walking away, you never once thought something was terribly wrong? Connor's damning silence was his only answer. You were prepared to lie to a judge? Brittany added, her voice sharp with disgust. You were going to sit in that chair and perjure yourself, testify that our parents had a storybook marriage. You were going to help Dad steal every single thing Mom ever built. No, I wasn't. You chose a side, Connor. Brittany cut him off, her words precise and merciless. You chose his money over our mother, so I hope it was worth it. That's when the facade he'd been hiding behind finally shattered, and he broke down, his body racked with ragged sobs. Mom, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. The true reckoning, as I understand it, came in the aftermath, in the quiet, hollowed out moments after the storm. My son, Connor, the boy who had chosen his monster of a father over me, finally had to look me in the eye without a judge as a buffer. I looked at the child I had raised, my heart a tangled mess of love and a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I told him, my voice tight with a pain that felt bottomless. Not today. Maybe not ever. He looked like I had slapped him. He just begged me to go home, mumbling that we would talk later before practically fleeing the room with tears streaming down his face. The moment that door closed, it was as if oxygen returned to my lungs. My daughter, Brittany, wrapped her arms around me in a fierce embrace. "You were amazing," she whispered into my hair. But even then, I knew I couldn't have done it without her, though she insisted my own strength was more than enough. That's when Liam, the man who had become my rock, stepped out from the back of the courtroom. He had been there the entire time, a quiet, steadying force. He only had to say my name, Sarah, and I turned to face the man who, through a miracle of timing at a desolate highway rest stop, had given me back my life. She gazed at Liam, the man who'd anchored her through an unimaginable hell, who, she now understood, had loved her across 4 decades without losing faith. "It's done," she breathed, the words releasing a pressure that had been building for years. "It's finally done," but Liam, my source recounted, simply offered a gentle smile. "No," he said softly, "it's not done. It's just beginning." The next 18 months were a slow, careful reconstruction, beginning with Ryan being handed an 18-year prison term for a litany of crimes: attempted murder, felony poisoning, and grand larceny, to name just a few. The judge made an example of him, detailing every aggravating factor: the calculated premeditation, the chilling cruelty of poisoning a spouse, and the sheer nerve of trying to steal her life's work. It was a sentence meant to echo. Ryan's mistress, Ashley, received 4 years for her role as an accessory. During her own trial, she made a desperate play for sympathy, trying to cast herself as another of Ryan's manipulated pawns, insisting she was ignorant of the true toxicity of his scheme. But in this digital age, your messages are forever. The texts revealed their entire conspiracy in cold, hard print, and the jury wasn't remotely convinced by her performance. I heard from a source that her life didn't just unravel, it completely imploded. Her clientele for personal training evaporated. The upscale fitness club where she worked terminated her contract immediately. Her meticulously curated social media presence, a significant revenue stream, went silent. A friend of Sarah's mentioned seeing her recently, a pale imitation of her former self, scanning items at a supermarket checkout in the Bronx. So, imagine this. One of Sarah's employees approaches her, saying, "You will not believe who was just bagging my groceries." She painted a picture of a woman, hair tucked into a flimsy net, wearing a dreary washed-out uniform, her face stripped of all makeup, looking like a phantom. And Sarah's reaction, a profound and total emptiness, not an ounce of pity. As for her son, Connor, he dodged a prison sentence. The district attorney concluded he wasn't a direct participant, only that he possessed, well, a guilty awareness of his father's affair. In the court of public opinion, however, the verdict was guilty. His entire world was set ablaze. The headlines were merciless. Son knew of father's poisoning plot and did nothing. That narrative went viral, a digital plague. He was fired from his high-paying corporate position. His circle of friends vanished like smoke. And his fiancée? She packed her things and never looked back. You might expect Sarah to feel a sense of vindication, some small taste of victory. What she felt instead was a deep, cavernous void. She returned to her city apartment only 2 weeks after the verdict, immersing herself in work, taking back the reins of the boutiques she had entrusted to her staff. To their credit, they'd done a phenomenal job. Profits had even climbed. But for Sarah, this was never about the bottom line. It was about rediscovering her own ground, about painstakingly rebuilding a sense of self. Liam returned to his own life, his practice upstate. They spoke on the phone daily and spent weekends together, but they were constructing their new reality with immense patience and care. There was a quiet, unspoken understanding to let things unfold naturally. "I've been waiting 40 years," he murmured to her once, his voice full of warmth. "I can wait a bit more." Her daughter Brittany was her constant, a pillar of unwavering support. Their weekly lunches resumed, but the atmosphere between them was transformed. With all the toxic secrets finally exposed, the dynamic had shifted. Sarah could now recognize the subtle warnings her daughter had been sending for years, and Brittany knew her mother had finally confronted the terrible truth. "Mom, are you happy?" Brittany ventured during one of their meals. "I'm working on it, sweetie, taking it one day at a time," Sarah admitted, a fragile smile on her face. "Liam helps. He helps more than I can say." Brittany's own smile was a reflection of her mother's. "Good," she affirmed. "You deserve someone who sees you for who you are." Then, nearly 2 years after Ryan was incarcerated, his son Connor resurfaced. Sarah was at one of her stores, inspecting a new winter collection, when one of her associates found her in the back. "Miss Sarah, there's a young man out front asking for you," the employee informed her. "He says he's your son." Her heart, she later said, began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hadn't spoken a single word to Connor since that final devastating day in court, having ignored every call and deleted every text. She hadn't been capable of facing him. But he was here now, on her territory, forcing a confrontation she couldn't escape. Stepping onto the sales floor, she saw him standing just outside on the pavement. He was unrecognizable, gaunt, weary, his face shadowed with stubble, dressed in plain, worn-out clothing that was a world away from his former polished existence. "Mom," he rasped, his voice shattering as their eyes met. "Connor." They stood frozen in a thick, charged silence, the city's symphony of honking cabs and pedestrian chatter swirling around them, a harsh reminder that life had moved on even as theirs had been suspended in trauma. "Can I come inside?" he finally asked. I need to talk to you." You could almost see the storm warring within Sarah. Every instinct screamed for him to get away from her. A part of her was aching to unleash the tidal wave of betrayal and rage she'd held back for 2 excruciatingly long years. But another voice, that quiet, persistent maternal instinct, whispered for her to just listen. "5 minutes," she stated, her tone sharp and final. That was all she would offer. They walked to her small office at the rear of the store. She positioned herself behind the desk, using it as a shield, as he remained standing, looking utterly lost. "Mom," he started, "I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it," he went on, his voice barely a whisper. "Then what are you doing here?" she countered, her own voice perfectly level, stripped of all warmth. Because I had to tell you that I finally see it. I see what I did. I understand the depth of how I failed you. She remained silent, letting his words occupy the suffocating space between them. He explained how he'd spent the past 2 years dissecting every single decision, trying to pinpoint the moment he became the kind of person who could know of his father's treachery and say nothing to his own mother. The kind of person who would perjure himself on a witness stand, choosing a potential inheritance over the soul of his own family. He drew a ragged breath. Mom, I realized I had become him, just a carbon copy of Dad. He taught me to lie, to charm, to always put myself first, no matter the cost. And I'm sickened by the person I allowed myself to become. When she offered no reply, he pressed onward. Please, just let me get this out. She gave a slight, almost invisible nod. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he repeated, his voice laced with desperation. But I needed to tell you that I'm trying to be better. I want to become a different man. I want to someday, if you ever allow it, be worthy of being your son again. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. And what precisely is your plan for doing that? Sarah finally inquired. I don't know, he confessed. But I was wondering if you needed any help around here with the shop. I would do anything. He offered to move boxes, organize the stockroom, or even sweep the floors. He was explicit that he didn't expect payment or any special treatment. He just wanted one opportunity, a single chance to be in her orbit and demonstrate through action that his desire to change was real. Sarah stared at her son, the boy whose silence had almost led to her death, who had sided with a monster over his own mother. And, for the first time, she saw a new light in his eyes, a raw, agonizing shame. The stockroom is an absolute mess, she said, after a long, measured silence. There are cartons back there that are years old. They need to be inventoried and organized by size on the racks. I can do that, he replied, without a flicker of hesitation. For the first month, it's unpaid. You arrive, you do the work, you leave, no conversation, no excuses. If you last 30 days, we'll talk then. Is that clear? And Connor, she called out as he turned to go. Yes? If you skip a single day, this arrangement is over for good. I won't miss a day, Mom. You have my word. He began the next morning. For weeks, they moved around each other like ghosts, exchanging almost no words. He arrived at 8 a.m. on the dot, went directly to the stockroom, and worked relentlessly, tackling the back-breaking labor everyone else tried to avoid. He would leave at the end of his shift without a single word of protest. Then, around the 3-week mark, Sarah was passing the stockroom and overheard his voice, patiently guiding a new hire through the inventory software. It just makes everything easier to locate, he was saying. My mom created the system a long time ago. It's actually genius. My mom. He hadn't called her Sarah. He'd called her my mom. It had only been a single month, 4 short weeks since everything imploded, when Jennifer made a staggering leap of faith. She let her son, Connor, back into the family business, putting him on the sales floor under the watchful eye of her partner, Jake. And the strange thing was, the kid was a natural. He had a disarming way of listening to people, of digging into what they truly needed beneath the surface. But 3 months into this fragile experiment, Jake pulled him aside. Connor, he said, his voice low and serious, something's different about you. Connor's eyes, shadowed with a guilt that never seemed to leave him, met his. I have to be different, Jake, he whispered, the words raw with desperation. I have to be. But Jake could still see it, a darkness that clung to him like a second skin. In that moment, something in Connor finally gave way. He looked at his mother, the woman who had clawed her way back from the abyss, and his voice cracked. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You rebuilt your entire world from absolute ruin, and I stood by and was ready to help him burn it all to the ground. He swore, his voice shaking with the effort, that he would dedicate every remaining day of his life to rebuilding the trust he had so casually incinerated. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. At last, Jennifer spoke, her voice steady. Dinner, tomorrow night. Brittany will be there. Terror and a wild, desperate hope flashed across Connor's face. Mom, are you sure? She answered with brutal honesty. No, but I am trying. Your sister hates me for this, and I can't even say she's wrong. I know that, Connor conceded, his voice barely audible. But she is your sister, Jennifer stated, her words a heavy decree. And a family, a real one, has to at least try, especially when it feels this impossible. That was it. That was the splinter of grace that shattered his composure. He didn't sob or make a sound. Silent tears just began to carve paths down his face. Thank you, Mom. God, thank you. She held up a hand, her expression unyielding. Don't thank me yet. This gesture doesn't fix a single thing. It just means I'm willing to start the work. There is a world of difference. He could only nod. I understand. Good, she said, her tone shifting back to business. Now get back out there. Those files aren't going to organize themselves, she added, a faint echo of the woman she used to be coloring her voice. He managed a broken, watery laugh through the tears. Yes, ma'am. Jennifer watched him leave her office, a storm of contradictions raging inside her. That was her son, the boy who had committed the most intimate of betrayals, the man who was now fighting like hell to become someone worthy of her trust. Forgiveness felt like a foreign shore she could see but might never reach. For the first time, however, she could just make out a path leading toward it. They were both trying, and sometimes, she had learned in the harshest of ways, trying is everything. The dinner was set for a Friday. All day, Jennifer was a knot of raw nerves. She meticulously prepared Brittany's favorite meal, a complex eggplant lasagna, and opened a vintage bottle of wine she'd been hoarding for a special occasion. She arranged the table with the precision of a diplomat, placing flowers and lighting candles until the room glowed. It felt less like a family meal and more like a high-stakes peace negotiation, the first act in a fragile new world. Brittany arrived first, looking stunning as always, but her beauty was sharpened by a tense, unforgiving line set around her mouth. She was fully aware her brother was coming, and absolution was not on the menu. Are you absolutely certain about this, Mom? She asked, her voice low and tight. No, Jennifer confessed, meeting her daughter's hard gaze. But I have to be. I have to see for myself if there's any chance he can change. And I think, deep down, you need to see it too. Brittany offered no reply, instead sinking into the sofa and crossing her arms, her face a carefully constructed mask. Jake showed up minutes later, having driven all the way from his place upstate to be her rock through the ordeal. The moment he walked in, Brittany rose and wrapped him in a genuine hug, a brief softening of her armor. Good evening, Jake. Thank you for being here. He squeezed her shoulder. I wouldn't be anywhere else tonight. And then it came. The sharp, sudden chime of the doorbell sliced through the tension in the room like a blade. It was him. With a deep breath, Jennifer went to open the door. This is where our story truly begins. It's a story about the aftershocks, about cleaning up the wreckage long after the bomb has gone off. Imagine him, Connor, standing in the hallway of the home he grew up in, now an alien landscape. He's clutching a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers, a parody of a nervous teenager on a first date. His mother opens the door. "Come in," she says, her voice flat. He steps inside, and every familiar corner, every photograph on the wall, feels poisoned by memory. And then he sees her. Across the room, his sister, Brittany, meets his gaze. In the crushing silence that falls, years of seething resentment and betrayal hang thick and heavy in the air. This was the confrontation that had been simmering for years, and the dining room table was its designated arena. In one corner sat Brittany, her spine rigid with loyalty, a warrior queen defending her mother's honor. In the other corner was her brother, Connor, the exile who had picked their father's side when the family shattered. When Connor finally managed to speak his sister's name, it was a strangled whisper, lost in the suffocating quiet. Her reply was a sliver of ice. She didn't even say his name. He tried to speak, to explain, calling himself a coward and a traitor. But Brittany cut him down with a single look. She made it clear his pathetic excuses had no currency here. Not tonight. Perhaps not for the rest of his life. Connor's words withered on his tongue. Brittany then laid out the evening's terms of engagement with a cold, surgical precision. She was present for one reason and one reason only. Their mother, Jennifer. This was not a negotiation. It was certainly not forgiveness. It was a temporary truce, a pass to occupy the same space for a few hours for their mom's sake. That was the deal. As soon as he absorbed that, she gave a sharp nod toward the lasagna. It was a silent command to begin what would undoubtedly be the most excruciating meal of their lives. Jake, bless his heart, tried valiantly to steer the conversation into the shallow, safe waters of normality. It was a monumental task. He talked about his latest project at work, a headline from the news, anything to fill the profound, gaping silence left by the betrayal that had its own seat at the table. Connor, for his part, was a ghost. He barely touched his food, moving the lasagna around his plate, offering only monosyllabic answers when addressed directly. He understood his status here. He was an inmate on probation in the very home he'd helped to demolish. All the while, Brittany constructed an impenetrable wall around him, engaging Jake, laughing with Jennifer, but never once allowing her gaze to drift in his direction. The fragile ceasefire was completely obliterated the moment dessert was served. Jennifer brought out a flain. This was no ordinary dessert. It was a relic, a family recipe passed down through generations, a ghost from the life they had before it all turned to ash. As she set it in the center of the table, she cleared her throat. "I'd like to make a toast." Instantly, the strained chatter ceased. Every eye in the room fixed on the woman at the head of the table, a survivor who was finally about to speak her truth. What Jennifer revealed next was the dark, twisted heart of the entire tragedy. A little over 2 years ago, she explained, she had woken up on a bus, her mind a complete blank, with no memory of how she had gotten there. The fog in her head was the result of powerful drugs administered by the man she had been married to for more than 3 decades. His plan had been monstrous in its simplicity: to methodically erase her mind, to scrub her of her identity, and to abandon the empty vessel that remained. But he failed. She woke up. Her voice trembled, but she held them all captive as she recounted the cost of that survival. The realization that her entire 33-year marriage had been an elaborate, cruel deception. But the losses, she explained, went even deeper than that. The image she held of her son, Connor, had been shattered, replaced by the memory of a stranger who had chosen to stand with her abuser. Her own innate trust in the world, the fundamental belief that the people who love you will keep you safe, had been utterly incinerated. As tears began to stream down her cheeks, her voice grew stronger. She began to speak of what she had gained from the wreckage. She had gained the unshakable knowledge that her daughter, Brittany, was the most fiercely loyal and courageous soul she had ever known. She looked directly at Brittany, and by then, they were both openly weeping together. Her eyes then found Jake, and she spoke of being granted a second chance at love with a man who had cared for her from a distance for 40 years, never losing hope. His own eyes glistened as he offered her a small, overwhelmed smile. And then, at last, her gaze settled on Connor. She spoke of gaining one last thing, a tiny, terrifyingly fragile hope. A hope that redemption might be possible, a hope that the most catastrophic mistakes do not have to be the final chapter, a hope that a family broken into a million pieces could at least begin to search for a way to put itself back together. Connor could not meet her eyes. He just stared at his hands on the table as his own silent tears fell. That, she concluded, was her toast. A toast to family, not the one you are born into, she clarified, but the one you choose, the one that circles the wagons when your world is burning down, the family that never stops trying, even when every instinct tells you it's impossible. She raised her glass. Instantly, Brittany's glass was up beside hers. Her own toast was simple and direct for her mother, Jennifer, the strongest woman she knew, the person who taught her how to stand her ground and fight for what is right. I am so unbelievably proud to be your daughter, every single day, Brittany said, her voice thick with a ferocious, protective love. You have always been, and will always be, my hero. Then it was Jake's turn. He lifted his glass to Jennifer, the woman he admitted he had loved his entire life, but had always been too timid to pursue. He told the table that she was the one who had saved him from his own shyness 40 years earlier, and that he would spend the rest of his life loving her. Reaching across the table, Nathan's hand covered hers, his voice raspy with an emotion that had been dormant for 4 decades. He told Sarah every second of the wait had been worth it just to be here. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room shifted, every ounce of pressure landing squarely on Spencer. You could practically hear the silence. He stared down into the dark red of his Cabernet as if searching for a script at the bottom of the glass. Finally, with a heavy scrape against the hardwood floor, he pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. He couldn't offer a toast, he said. He didn't have the right to be in the same room with them. He confessed that he wasn't worthy of a mother like Sarah or a sister as loyal as Ashley, not after everything he'd done. His composure shattered, and the silent tears that had been tracing paths down his face turned into raw, ragged sobs. Then he finally said it. The words he owed his mother from 2 years prior. His eyes locked on hers. He was sorry. Sorry for every single time he chose his father, for every instance he willfully ignored the truth because the lie was so much easier to live with. I'm sorry I was a coward, he managed to get out, his voice cracking before his gaze shifted to his sister. Ashley, you were always the brave one. Always. It was a full confession. He admitted she had seen the monster for who he was while he had been defending him. She had chosen their mother while he had chosen the money. He said she was the daughter Sarah deserved, whereas he was simply the son she was stuck with. And in that raw, unguarded moment, something in Ashley's stony expression seemed to give. It was nowhere close to forgiveness, not even in the same zip code, but it might have been the first sign of a thaw. Spencer pressed on, insisting he wasn't asking for their pardon because he knew he hadn't come close to earning it. Instead, he made a promise, a solemn vow to them both at that dinner table. He swore he would dedicate the rest of his life to becoming the son and the brother they should have had all along. His hand trembled as he lifted his wine glass. "To my mother," he declared, "the strongest person I've ever known. The very woman he had betrayed, who was now impossibly offering him this fragile chance at redemption." He promised he wouldn't squander it. But his words simply hung in the air, swallowed by a profound, suffocating silence. Ashley's expression remained unchanged. Her glass stayed on the table. She wouldn't even look at him. Spencer was left standing alone, his toast evaporating into nothing. After an agonizingly long moment, his arm fell to his side, and he sank back into his chair, looking utterly defeated. That evening, only 3 glasses were raised: Sarah's, Ashley's, and Nathan's. Spencer just stared at his untouched meal. The dinner concluded not long after, shrouded in a quiet tension. The dessert went uneaten. Ashley was the first to leave the table, pulling her mother into a fierce, protective embrace at the front door. "I love you, Mom," she murmured. "I love you too, my girl." Then she brought up Spencer, her voice low but unwavering. She told her mother she hadn't forgiven him and wasn't sure she ever could. He could have a job at the family business. He could try to be a different person. But for Ashley, the brother she knew had ceased to exist the day he took their father's side in court. "I understand you want us to be a family again," she told Sarah. "But some things, once they're shattered, can't be put back together. Some pieces just don't fit anymore," she explained. After a gentle kiss on her mother's forehead, her final words were, "You have too much grace, Mom. I don't." And with that, she was gone. Spencer left a few minutes later, pausing in the doorway to thank Sarah for the dinner, for the opportunity. She just looked at her son, the boy who had demolished her world and was now trying to rebuild it, and offered him nothing but the unvarnished truth. He stood there and absorbed every word. She admitted she didn't know if genuine forgiveness was possible. He could work at the store. He could continue his efforts to atone. But he had to accept that their old life was gone forever. It could never be reclaimed. Fresh tears streamed down his face. "I understand, Mom," he whispered. "I hope so," she replied, "because Ashley isn't going to budge. And as for me, I'm trying. But trying isn't a guarantee," she added. "I know." She told him to go, that she would see him at the store on Monday. His gaze drifted past her, toward the living room where Nathan was waiting. "Look after her," Spencer said to him. "She deserves someone who will." Then he turned and walked into the night. There was no hug, no pardon, no hint that absolution was even on the horizon. Sarah shut the door. Finally, it was just the two of them. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked, his tone full of care. And she was. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a profound sense of peace. He moved closer, taking both of her hands in his. "Sarah," he began, "there's something I have to ask." She held her breath, her pulse quickening. He acknowledged everything she had endured and her need for time. But he confessed he couldn't imagine another day of his life without her in it. "So, what's the end game here, Nathan?" she asked, her voice so soft he leaned in to hear it. He put it all on the table, plain and simple. The end game is that I love you, Sarah. I think I've loved you for my entire life, and I'm done wasting time. I want to spend all my remaining days right here by your side. He quickly clarified that he wasn't proposing. After all, his own divorce after 33 years of marriage was still recent. But he needed her to understand that he wasn't letting her go again. She just looked at him for a long moment, truly seeing him. This was the man she had let go of 40 years ago, the one who had never forgotten her, who had found her again in the ruins of her life. Nathan, she whispered. He leaned closer. Yeah? A small smile played on her lips as she said, Be quiet and kiss me. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, and he did. It was a kiss that held 4 decades of longing, a kiss that felt like a new lease on life. When they finally broke apart, it was Nathan who was weeping. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I chose the wrong man the first time around, she told him, her own voice thick with unshed tears. This time, I'm making the right choice. He had to be certain, had to hear her say it. She just smiled through her tears and replied, I'm 40 years certain. They stood there, holding each other in the quiet house, with 2 forgotten wine glasses on the table, at the start of something new. Nathan understood this was no fairy tale conclusion. He had no idea what the future held. He didn't know if he could ever truly forgive his ex-wife Chloe for her betrayal, or if his daughter Ashley would ever see her brother as anything but an enemy. The devastation was biblical, the kind of emotional wreckage that leaves permanent scars. But he was certain of one thing. He had survived the poison, the calculated betrayal of a wife, and the spineless cowardice of his own son. He had survived 33 years inside a marriage that was a carefully constructed lie, a cold and methodical plot designed to erase him from existence. Yet, here he stood, wrapped in the arms of a woman who loved him unconditionally, with a daughter who was his anchor, and a business he had poured his soul into. This was a far cry from a happy ending, but it was a beginning. And in this world, sometimes a new beginning is the most valuable thing of all. She had sentenced him to a slow, agonizing demise, to an oblivion where his memory would simply dissolve. Instead, he was the one who helped detectives put her in a prison cell. He had believed he knew the 2 people he loved most, his wife and his son, but life has an astonishingly cruel way of exposing people's true character when they are finally cornered and forced to choose. And this family's story is a devastating monument to that cold, heartbreaking truth.